Hi, I'm Rachel Dillon.
And I'm Marcus Dillon.
And this podcast is Who's Really the Boss, where we highlight the joys
and challenges
of running a business with your spouse or family.
Our mission is to strengthen families and businesses by helping listeners avoid the mistakes we have made so they can lead
and live happily ever after. Well, welcome back to another episode of Who's Really the Boss.
I'm Marcus Dillon.
I'm Rachel Dillon, and I think we should just go ahead and make this a trend of we've had our Sonic, so we're ready to go. Again, Sonic, we support you daily, so any sponsorship you want to give back to the podcast, we'll gladly accept.
Yeah. Giving away all the free advertising of the two people that are listening to this. So
what's your drink of choice? Or what's
Mine?
Your order of choice from Sonic?
Oh, you got to go Route 44 Diet Coke with ice. It's the dream.
Yep.
You?
Not that. So I go, maybe it's opposite. Diet Dr. Pepper, no ice.
I think Sonic just dropped the sponsorship because they believe in that ice quite a bit, and everybody else just, logged off, because if you don't like Sonic ice, something is wrong in your life.
Let me give you a pro tip. So as an accountant, I guess, by proxy, I need to get the most bang for my buck. And if you put ice in it, then you're getting less drink. And Sonic, they have their temperature of their fountain drinks turned down low enough that they are cold when they come out and don't have to have ice. So anyway, Pro tip, free tips, best accounting advice you've ever received. They have just been dropped on you.
Yeah. You're an addict is what you are. So
yes.
All right.
Sure.
So we're back. And so we're talking about things to consider before hiring your spouse. This could easily be applied to any other family member, friend, somebody that you have a relationship with other than employment, I guess. And so if you've listened to the previous episode, maybe you want to go listen to that. But just as a quick recap, things to consider up to this point, up to this episode, are the needs of the business and what other options exist, unique qualifications of your spouse or that person to fill those needs, and then desired role or outcome of that person. We won't even say spouse. We'll just say of that person. You could totally take this as like a much higher HR issue and approach it from a very professional lens and view your spouse as any other candidate for the role. That's probably what you should do, honestly.
All right, so we're starting part 2 today of things to consider when you are considering hiring a spouse. And we're just going to broaden that term of spouse to anyone that you could likely be spending holidays and vacations and days off with. Someone that you're sitting across from Thanksgiving dinner or relaxing on the beach with probably need to go through these same considerations. So let's get started. So first consideration of part 2 is definitely looking at what is hiring your spouse or friend, what are going to be the effects of that change or that transition?
Yeah. So how is life going to change? How is relationship going to change? I know that, speaking from personal experience, we had to figure that out with what it meant to our family. For us as a couple. So I think, given your transition in, what words of wisdom, what talking points do you have there for people?
So this is one that I think that we maybe actually did consider this before hiring. So we talked through the family, but we may have been limited to talking through all the good things that would come of me leaving my teaching position to coming to work for the firm. So when I was coming, I was going to come as part-time only. So then I would have more available time for the girls. So getting them to practices, picking them up from school, going on field trips, having lunch with them, those sorts of things. And so we actually did consider what that would look like as far as, okay, I'm no longer tied to my classroom, for the school day, and then have additional work that I would be working on in the evenings or have to get done. And so we did talk through that. So then something that we didn't talk through, because I was coming from one place of employment and actually decreasing my hours, was if I had been a mom who worked in the home or a stay-at-home mom at the time who would be coming into a role, whether it be part-time or full-time.
I think that would be a much bigger change to discuss. And I think that's probably the more natural change that most people go through is the family has made a decision for the person to provide at home during a certain age of the children, or even if you're taking care of somebody else, maybe a parent or grandparent. And then the opportunity comes up, the need comes up for this person to fill the role in something that's special, the business, the family business. So do not discount, I guess, what the impact is, because it's much harder, much more painful to live through those effects if they aren't thought out, right? And we were very naive in thinking mainly on the positives and what that looked like. We discounted completely the other role from the very beginning. So there were a lot of benefits to your job when you taught, and we did not probably give those credit for whatever reason, because we were so driven to make it work the other option, that we really probably discounted a lot of the positive for the other. So
yeah. So I think considering when you have a spouse working now with you in your business, you guys are sharing roles of the business throughout, I would say, majority of the day. So then at home, that's going to look different. So things need to be discussed of when is grocery shopping going to happen and who's going to do it? Who's going to do laundry? Is the same person always responsible for pickup and drop off of kids? Or if a child gets sick, how do you handle who's going to take care of that kid? So I think those are all things to just discuss, so expectations are set and one person doesn't feel like the expectation is all of those things live on them, but now they have limited time to do it.
Yeah, that's good. Teamwork makes the dream work, right? And I think going into it with a plan, with a playbook of, hey, here's our schedule, here's how we're going to do life. And because now you got two calendars, right? The family calendar and the office calendar kind of commingled, and definitely doing that the right way from the very beginning was a learning curve for us.
Yeah. And just really setting that out, we mentioned on part one of things to consider that looking at all the other options that are out there. So for the responsibilities that do need to take place at home, can those things be outsourced? Can you hire or get help with the house cleaning and the laundry? Can you do grocery delivery instead of that person who typically went into the store and shopped for groceries? And really sitting down and asking the kids, asking each other, what do I do at home that's really important and valuable to you? And what do I do that you couldn't care less if it happened at all? And definitely don't care if I'm the one who has to do it.
Yeah, I think someone very wise in your life asked or put that question on your heart to actually ask our children that question. And what was the result of that, I guess, whenever you asked? Our kids were a different age to where they could respond versus young babies. Like who knows what they would respond, right? But how did our kids respond with those situations?
Yeah, I think there were some things like having the house perfectly clean, having the laundry like always done, put away, ready, picking them up and taking them to practices. Those were some of the things that I felt that I needed to have done at all times, perfectly, of course. But asking them, really the only one that mattered to them at the time was they did want me or you taking them to practice. They didn't necessarily want like a driver, so somebody that they didn't know, or somebody who's not wasn't one of us in the family, taking them to and from practice. And so that was something that we made sure to keep steady. Then they turned into teenagers. They have friends who drive, and they could care less if we are anywhere. They would much rather go with their friends or drive themselves wherever they need to get.
Yeah, it's a lot more fun with friends, especially when you have access to the Chick-fil-A, Starbucks app, credit card or debit card at your disposal on the way home, and you can stop for a snack. Who wouldn't love that? So that's really good. So the effects on the family, any other considerations or effects on the relationship, I guess, any other considerations there before we go to the next?
Yeah, just thinking through, we kind of talked about me leaving one position and coming into another position within the firm. And so thinking through, I was a teacher. I wouldn't say that I was a boss or had a title that, held a lot of distinction or anything like that. However, I was the teacher in the classroom. So I was in charge of, however many kids were sitting there in front of me. I didn't really have anyone else telling me what to do or when to do it. I planned out every minute of every day and was in charge of that. I wasn't waiting on somebody to tell me what to do or to tell me how to do it. Other people may be leaving a different career or profession where they do have a management title. Maybe they do have more responsibility and have a lot of pride in that. So I think another thing to consider is where are they coming from? And just taking into account ego and pride that may need to be addressed if they're coming from what would be considered a higher position into maybe a lesser position. Likely they're wanting less stress and less responsibility. They're wanting that, but they may not be considering what that's going to do if now they're looking at their spouse as the one who's, instructing them a lot of their day.
Yeah, even more maybe of their day. And so I think that's where boundaries have to exist. But it is a really good point. And just so the listeners know, you didn't quit mid-year. You finished up the year. You went out on top as teacher of the year. It has to be done the right way. And you don't want to burn any bridges in the short term whenever you're exiting, because hey, if it doesn't, that's what we said from the very beginning. If this doesn't work, you can always go back to teach. And, some days that probably feels like the right answer, but for most of the part, I think not. And so I would recommend, just like any other exit from a team, that's considered, that you do that the right way.
Well, just in case there are any other teachers listening who are considering going to work with their spouse, make sure when you finish the year that you let your spouse know you are not starting until after the summer, because you have already earned that summer. You're getting paid through that summer. So make sure they know. Marcus, I think you made me start on June 6th or something. I think I ended one job and the very next Monday I started at Dillon CPA. So that was something else that we didn't fully consider, was what are the kids going to do during the summer when they're not at school and they weren't the age where they were already going to a daycare. So again, considerations of what does that transition look like for the responsibilities of the family when both spouses go to work in the business.
Yep. Well, good stuff. So the next point that we were going to touch on this time is just the growth, right?
Yeah. So growth path within the business. What does that look like? We were naive, or maybe I was just naive. I thought I was coming in and I would always be the front desk girl. That's what I thought was that was the pinnacle. That's where I was starting and that's where I would finish. I would be at the front desk, answering phones, making copies, scanning papers. I don't think that we really ever had that position, and even our current person who helps with some of those responsibilities, that's not actually her only role or responsibilities within the firm. So really talking through what does, maybe you are starting in one place within the business, and then do you have a desire to we'll say move up the ladder, if that fits and is relevant to your business, or really what is the plan for the spouse.
So is this podcast, this episode, also kind of your growth path? Like, are you going to let listeners in on what your goal is, or is that too depressing?
I don't know. I don't want to scare anybody, but I think we're open enough. We're good enough friends with our team. I always say I'm always trying to exit, right? Like, how do I not work at all anywhere? How do I become independently wealthy and independent? But yeah, no, that's my growth path.
Yeah, it would be great if you became independently wealthy, by the way. I would support that fully.
I think that's my only way out, right? That's it.
Death or independently wealthy. Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
So with Growth Path, this is a lot of what we do at the office and for clients. So growth, looking at different mechanisms to look at growth. Part of it is financial growth as well, right? So I guess talking into the finances, is it now appropriate to kind of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And in hopefully the need for bringing on this person is part of the growth path of the business. And it's, things are moving up and to the right, and, revenue is growing, business is growing. It's taking more need away from the founder or founders, and they need trusted support. So that's probably what's led to the beginning of this conversation. So as that growth plan continues, the financial picture, you're obviously trading one salary for potentially another. And maybe it is more or less than what they were making at the other. Maybe it's more because they stayed at home and did not have an income outside of the home. But maybe it's less because overall, the total compensation package at their previous employment was a certain salary plus benefits plus certain other perks that maybe don't exist in the business. And so I know that was one of the big deciding factors, and probably delayed our decision for a year or two, was just benefits like insurance and things like that. So as a young family, we place value on that health insurance, and we wanted to make sure that we had a plan in place. So that's another consideration that I think is very important before you pull the trigger, hire them, and they give notice at their previous employment.
Yeah. And then maybe if we have some listeners who are not in the accounting space, what are some of the benefits financially for the business of hiring the spouse?
There are benefits. You have to weigh benefits and like pros and cons of both sides. So benefits of hiring the spouse is obviously continuing to grow the net worth of the owner. And so if you're not paying wages outside of the family, those wages then stay inside the family. Sometimes it's just easier to pay the wages outside the family though. So paying the wages, increasing the family net worth. We're in Texas where it's community law state. So 50% of what's yours is 50% mine, vice versa. So, a lot of times we'll see owners start putting family members on payroll for the work that they're doing in the business. And really, maybe they're just maximizing retirement benefits that they have in place. And so maybe that's just the step one, because the extra income that would come along with like W-2 wages aren't really that big of a benefit, because they factored in the payroll taxes and things like that. And so they're trying to maximize as much benefit as they can from a retirement perspective, but minimize payroll taxes. And it's really finding that balance for what that person is doing in the business. Now that works when it's a couple, when it's spouses. When it is family members, that's not the case. So if you hire your parent or sibling or relative, that is not the case there. And so you have to pay something that's a little bit more equitable, more market value for that person. And if that person were to leave, you're going to be in a much better spot because you're used to paying market. So whenever you bring in that other option that existed before you hired them, then you're kind of back to a reasonable budget because you're already paying that person a fair total compensation package. So,
yeah. So I think what I hear you saying is really the financial benefit or the tax benefit of hiring your spouse is probably the last and the least consideration of actually hiring your spouse, that where there's a need that needs to be filled by a person.
Correct. We'll have some people, as part of tax planning, their spouse does something, it isn't an integral role in the business, and they're on payroll and they're maximizing. But once that need kind of really transfers to, hey, I'm going to need you to show up tomorrow at 8:30 and you can't leave until 5.
And every day thereafter.
Yeah, that's probably a little bit different of a conversation of a need. And it's definitely not a conversation that's happening just because of like tax planning and business planning. So, but yeah, that definitely the growth, the financial growth, can you support that decision? Is the business there maturity wise to support that decision? Yeah.
And so I think moving on to our last consideration would be just talking about having your spouse, that they're showing up at 8:30 and staying till 5 Monday through Friday. Is that sustainable long term? So is your spouse the long-term solution for that need that you're trying to fill?
I think that you have to be realistic, and everybody hopefully loves that person that they do life with, and hopefully they like them too, enough to want to spend time with them that much time. But you have to be realistic. So what are the traits of your spouse? Are those traits going to make life at the office more difficult? Is your spouse, are they not a good listener? Or do they not follow through? Do they show up late? And I've just described myself on purpose. So
just, make that real clear. You didn't describe me. You were describing yourself in those.
And so when you decide to hire me and come on board to this,
I would fire you. You would be fired.
I would apply for unemployment day one. So, so all those traits that your spouse uniquely brings to your relationship, how is that going to impact the business? And you have to do that at arm's length, evaluate them just like any other candidate. I know that in the season of hiring that we do, you do social profiling and kind of look at other aspects of people's lives and try to get to learn a little bit about them during the interview process and ask questions and just see how they're going to be as a person, because technical skill only goes so far, especially with our team. You have to be fun to be around. You have to be able to communicate really well, or it may not be a long relationship. So I think those are the things that you have a unique and intimate perspective of your spouse, because you know them probably better than others. And you have to be honest in, is it a good fit? Or is it a good fit, or is it an easy fit? And if it's just an easy fit, that is probably not appropriate with moving forward. And so I think you owe it to yourself, your business, and your spouse, maybe to not hire your spouse at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so really looking at that and just revisiting the points that we made earlier about your spouse can't necessarily be your backup. So if you're hiring your spouse, they can't necessarily be the person that is your fill-in or your other half, because then when you do have family emergencies, vacations, things like that, you can't both be out together. And then the other thing, does it make sense to set a term limit as far as the experiment? So you're deciding that, yes, we think this is the appropriate option. This is the best option, is to hire my spouse. And then do you set a trial like you would do maybe for any other team member of the 90 days to revisit? How is this going? Is this working? Or maybe since it's your spouse, you give it a little bit longer. Maybe you give it 6 months or a year, but maybe you set a time limit. Or if they are filling a need temporarily because they are easy right then, but they're not sustainable long-term, to definitely set a time limit, like by this such and such date, we need to have somebody who is long-term in place.
I think if you deviate from what you would do for other new team members, there has to be a good reason for that. So yeah. I think to make it easier on the business owner, on the rest of the team, I would stick to what you would do for other team members. So much like you have a 90-day probationary period across the board for all new team members, do the same for your spouse. Do one-on-ones, do weekly check-ins, do formal reviews, however many times a year. Follow that same cadence that you do with other team members. And because ultimately there's more than just one important thing in this equation in the business. The other important thing is the relationship and the family that is behind the business. So I think you owe it to that relationship to be candid enough and have things on the calendar to where it forces those conversations to be addressed. And, there's books out there where, it encourages you, it tells you stories about being candid and honest and open and having good communication, because if you keep not addressing it, just brushing it off, it's going to bubble up into a much bigger problem.
Yeah. Is it Andy Stanley that says to be unclear is to be unkind? And ever since I have heard that, I kind of live by that now. So it was easy to brush it off or let it go or not say something or do it in a passive aggressive way. But have found I'm wiser now and know better to really just speak clearly of what's going on. I think you set out some homework for us to do, so we'll probably need to wrap this episode up because I would say that I have not had a formal review for my job, and I have been here more than 8 years now. And if we're going back to the name of our podcast, Who's Really the Boss, does that mean I get to give you a formal review, which also has not happened, even though we do it for all of our other team members?
Whatever.
Are you nervous?
Whatever.
Are you nervous? Does it make you nervous?
Yeah, do I have to do the 3-3-1 and fill that out like on growth plan and what I think I'm?
Oh, I think we're going straight scorecard for you, buddy.
Oh, I'm probably going to get put on a growth plan and then get off the bus really quick here. So this may be my last podcast. It was fun. So
we'll tell the listeners any last words since this might be your last one.
No, I think in all honesty, learn from our mistakes, learn from what we may not be doing well, what we're trying to improve upon. Be candid, and candor goes a long way in any relationship. There are resources out there. There are great leaders like Andy Stanley that can encourage you along the way. Find other people that are also in your same situation. Make sure that you're kind of working off of one another and you've got resources that you're following up with. But in kind of leaving you today, just thinking about those top 3 that we've talked about. So the effects on other relationships, the family effects on the family, or home, whatever you want to say. Maybe you don't have a family at home. The growth path for that spouse and the growth path for the business, making sure that it is the right financial decision and that it can be supported. And then finally, what's sustainable long term. And I think if you go into it with those three things in mind, you're going to be ready for our next conversation, which is about best practices, right?
Yeah. And listeners, you guys are already ahead of the game. You're already considering, you're already planning. So don't do exactly as we did, learning the hard way. We have found a better way and are just trying to help you guys on that path.
All right. Excited for what's next.
All right.